One of my favorites is Russell's Reserve. We get an opportunity to do barrel picks there. It's definitely one of my favorites. That's what I'm pouring. That's what I'm having right now, drinking with you all. So if you have something that you're drinking here at the chat, let's go ahead and put it in there. I'll kind of throw your name in here. I'd love to see what everybody's doing, where they're from. There's a lot of good stuff coming in chat as well in regards of where people are chiming in from. I saw a lot of people from New York, from Maine, California, San Diego with inside there as well. So it's really cool to see a large whiskey community come together for this awesome special occasion that has never been done before, of having this sort of an ability to have an online bourbon conference. If you've ever wanted to see what a whiskey conference is all about, this is one of the great opportunities of being able to do this. As I'd mentioned, we've paired and partnered together with a lot of the great people that are in the bourbon and whiskey community. A lot of these people are content creators, people that really have a passion and a joy for bourbon and whiskey and want to really learn and know more about it and share their learnings. As I'd mentioned, if you subscribe to all of the podcasts, all the blogs, follow everybody on Instagram and on Twitter, your feed is going to be full of all new and interesting stuff that you're going to be seeing as we start going through here. So just to throw some names out there, I see sort of Florida, Minnesota. Let's see. I see Thomas Edwards is drinking Eagle Rare. We got Pete drinking Wild Turkey 101 in Dayton, Ohio. Stephen Elders drinking Shanks. Shanks is one that probably doesn't get it as much attention as it might deserve. That's one that actually comes from Michter's. So anybody that doesn't know that, so they have a few different kind of like smaller brands that they do. And so Shanks is one of those. So nice seeing that. Dan Z says he's drinking Taylor Single Barrel. That kind of goes back to one of those things that's one of those bottles that are getting relatively really hard to find. I remember when I really started getting into whiskey and you start seeing all the E.H. Taylors, you have the barrel proof, which is by far my favorite and damn near impossible to find. But now we've got, the hysteria has gone nuts. And now people are like waiting in line to get E.H. Taylor small batch. So glad you're able to find that one. So E.H. Taylor is always a solid pick right there. Sean Sawyer in Nashville drinking McKenna 10. I'm surprised that didn't come up in the sleeper panel. McKenna 10 was made popular really last year by Fred Minnick as it won one of his, or actually won, I think it was San Francisco, but won San Francisco spirits competition, one of the premier bourbon and whiskey competitions that are out there. So anybody that kind of comes away with a double gold or a best of in that competition means it goes through multiple rounds of blind tastings, and whatever comes out on top, man, it definitely hits a lot of people's palates. And Barrel Bourbon has been doing a fantastic job killing that competition over the past few years. So kudos to them as well. Dan Cowles in Arkansas, and he just made the Manhattan with Old Forester 100 proof rye. When we were talking about earlier, I think within inside of the chat, people had asked about what type of, since it is Derby Day, what type of bourbon do you use with your mint julep? I'm a huge fan of just 100 proof Old Forester as well. I actually do a large batch of mint juleps. I don't make them individually. Instead, I make a huge batch in a 1.75 liter. And so it's easy to just take it to the party, pour yourself a glass of ice. And when we do this, I'm not using the Gucci ice, as you kind of see with Ryan and having those clear ice cubes. It's just solo cups and fridge ice, pouring the mint julep mix just right on top of it. And it's better than a lot of the pre-mixed stuff that you can buy off the shelf. So if you want that recipe, let me know. I can put it in the Eventbrite email after this. And so you all have the recipe to be able to access that as well. Jason Burks chiming in from Honolulu. How awesome is that? So we got Hawaii in here. Let's see. Corey Mickleys. I'm probably butchered your name. Drinking Larceny. One of the cool things that we've seen with Larceny over the past year is that they are now expanding the brand more and more. So you now have Larceny Barrel Proof that has just now made an entrance into the market. So if Larceny is sort of your thing and you want to kind of like crank it up to 11, if you will, go check out the Barrel Proof. Sometimes it's hit and miss of what people prefer and what they don't prefer. But the great thing that you get with Barrel Proof whiskey is that, and this is something that I learned from a good buddy named Kyle that plays in a band called Penny and Sparrow that was on the podcast. He says the one great thing about Barrel Proof whiskey is you can enjoy it in 4 different ways. You can enjoy it with just having it neat. You can add ice to it, and it completely changes the character as it continues to melt with inside the ice. So whether you sip it first and whether you wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes and sip it again, the flavors continue to change and meld. So really a cool opportunity to be able to do that as well. So Rich said Larceny is a sleeper. It's one of those things that it's always on the shelves, always available. A weeded bourbon coming from the weeded mash bill at Heaven Hill. So maybe that's something we'll talk about in maybe a future whiskey from home if we were all interested into it, about looking at a breakdown of mash bills that come from different distilleries across, basically some of the majors that you might see on the shelf today. Let's see. Martin is drinking Woodford and his mint juleps. Let's see. We got somebody drinking Double Oaks. That's Peter Hatton Jr., Double Oak, Texas, Michter's Rye Barrel Proof. I'll tell you what, that Michter's Rye Barrel Proof, there's something really good in coming a lot of those Michter's Barrel Proof versions that they are putting out. Last few ones, Michael Beaver with Pursuit Series, episode 19. Cheers, Michael. Thanks you for saying that. So anybody that doesn't know, you kind of see the bottles behind me. Ryan and I, who you just saw, we started our own whiskey line called Pursuit Series about 2.5 years ago. And so we choose individual single barrels to actually sell, and we sell them through our next presenter, who is Blake, who not only runs the infamous blog of bourboner.com, but also runs sealbox.com. So Blake, welcome to the show today, and thanks for being here.
Kenny, thanks for having me. This has been fun. I've been tuning in throughout the day, so excited to do this and to get my session going. So yeah, thanks for putting this together.
Absolutely. So Blake's going to be talking about why craft whiskey is getting better, and here's why. So I'll hop off and let you take it over.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. As Kenny said, I started off in the bourbon world as running a blog called Bourboner. And then it's funny, I was going back doing some research for this event today, and I looked at an old blog post that I actually never posted that was from 2015, and it said, "Craft is coming, and here's why." The problem was in 2015, I couldn't fill out an entire blog post, it felt like. So I was like, okay, I'll hold off for now. But and so it's really improved over the years. And since then, I have started a online retail site called sealbox.com. And basically, we only focus on craft whiskey. So whenever Kenny was asking for ideas of what people wanted to present and that kind of stuff, what immediately came to my mind was craft is getting better. And if you've been in bourbon for long enough, everybody has that story about getting burnt by a craft bottle. Some bottle that they spent $100 for. It was 6 months old and a 5-gallon barrel, and just you couldn't even mix it with Coke. You couldn't push it off on your friends, and that was it. You gave up. You went back to chasing limited edition bourbons, and you were just done on craft. You didn't care. But a lot of that has changed. And, I say back in 2015, I was doing that article, and that's when it really started to come around. You tasted some of these different bourbons and whiskeys and other spirits from these distilleries, and it's like, this is pretty good. It's good for craft. And that is what I think was kind of the next progression was, it's good for craft. What we're hitting now is a lot of these that are, it's not just good for craft, it's just good whiskey. And so, with all that said, I'll kind of back it up a little bit and talk about just the craft distilling movement in general. So, after Prohibition, distilling shut down. There's a few major distilleries in Kentucky that can still distill. All the smaller guys shut down. Once it's repealed, we have about a 50-year time span. And then in around 1982, there's still some debate over who was the first craft distiller to come back on the market, but it's really one of four. There's Domaine Rubin, Jackson Keys, which is a winery, and they make Jepson brandy. And then you have St. George and Charbet. So all West Coast, all with more of a brandy wine distilling on an alembic still kind of deal. And so they kind of go along and they're making products, and around 2005 is where we really see that curve. It's that hockey stick. It starts to really just shoot up. So around 2005, there's 100 active craft distilleries. By 2018, we have almost 1,800 active craft distilleries. And so, that's a huge number. And so if you've bought craft over the last decade, it could be from a mixture of different places. You could have somebody who was part of that first wave, the 2005, or, you could just have a new person on the block who is, they've only been open for a year or so. I kind of go back with seal box of how I define what we carry. And so we say we only carry craft. That definition changes a little bit. Initially we would say anything that is independently owned or less than 25% can't be by an outside investor, or producing less than 100,000 proof gallons. Well, the majority of people don't understand what proof gallon is. It's really just used for taxes. So what we've kind of transitioned to is these non-heritage distillers. So NHD is how I reference them. And so that, we're looking at the non-heritage guys. So the guys outside of Kentucky who are doing things a little bit different. And that's been even bigger for the industry. Is there's people outside of the main, 7, 8, your Beams, your Maker's Mark, your Buffalo Trace, your Four Roses, that are starting to make really good product, and they're making it at scale. We've got a Wilderness Trail who they're pumping out, probably close to 30,000 plus barrels a year. That's not a small number by any stretch of the imagination. So that's when, I think a lot of things started to click for the craft industry. Not only did you have people that had been around for a while that were coming out with better products, you also had people who were doing it for longer. And I always, it's basically time from a bunch of different aspects. One, the barrels had more time to mature, to age. And two, the producers just got better. I can't tell you how many distillers I've talked to where it's like, yeah, we first opened up and we didn't really know what we were doing. And now we've got the system down, we're making great product, and what we're laying down today is better than what we were laying down last year. And, that's countless conversations I've had with distillers who same exact scenario. So I'll kind of jump into that a little bit later. But, the biggest question I get is, why is craft so expensive? And that's always a question, is it, hey, if you watch the last segment, why should I not just go buy Rare or Wild Turkey 101 it sits on the shelf for $20 a bottle. Why would I not go buy that when that's probably 6-ish years old? It's 101 proof and it's good. There is no great answer for that other than people like to try different things. As you can see behind me, I have more bourbon than I probably will drink in my lifetime, but it's fun to try different things. It's fun to see what different distillers can produce and what kind of flavor notes come through. And so, there's reasons why it's more expensive, but we start to see some of these craft distilleries compete with some of the bigger guys in blind tastings. With the round table, we did a blind tasting where everybody submitted a bottle of one of their favorite barrel picks, and 2 of the top 3 of the ones that we had were from craft producers. One was a Bourbon Pursuit series pick from Mackenzie up in New York, Finger Lakes Distilling, and then the other one was from Wilderness Trail. So that is kind of the nice thing. So I'll set that up to say, it started off slow. There's no doubt about that. But we're definitely seeing improvements. And what I've seen so far is, there's no denying there's been some bad whiskey out there. But I don't think it's a broken production process, or I think it's more of a broken production process, not just a broken industry. And, you see that a lot where the craft name gets tainted, and it's like, not everything craft is bad. There's just, there's bad products out there. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So just to take it back, when I'd say in the early, 2008, 2009, 2010, you have a lot of these producers who they're starting a distillery and they're having a hard time getting set up. So what do? They just mimic what the Kentucky guys are doing. So, basically what's a Kentucky distiller doing? It's taking number 2 dent corn. It's putting about 80% corn in the mash. It's going to put some rye and a little bit of malted barley. Then it's going to distill it to a high proof. 160 is the top you can go for bourbon. They're going to come off the still at 160. They're going to proof it down a little bit to 125 because that's the legal limit for bourbon. They're going to throw it in a barrel. The problem is you've got the Kentucky guys who they're doing this with thousands of barrels, and they're doing it for 6, 8, 20 years, with some of these bourbons. That allows the bourbon to age, to, just a lot of things to happen in the barrel. What the craft guys tried to do is they took that exact same process leading up, and then, just they said, all right, we'll just make Kentucky bourbon, but then we'll pull it out at 6 months, or we'll just put it into a smaller barrel thinking that it's going to age faster. And it just didn't work out. The problems that you get is there were problems with the mash. There were problems with the distillation techniques. There were problems with the smaller barrels, and the overall product just was not great. So, I think there was a few rounds of that, of going through, oh man, we're in trouble here because, they got to have cash flow coming in. This is a business at the end of the day. So what do you have to do? You have to sell something that you may not be as proud of. Then, if you could allow it to age 6, 8 years, you would have been okay. But, the distillery shuts down if, you're not selling products. So that forced a lot of products onto the market a lot sooner. And I think it took a toll on a lot of, especially bourbon enthusiasts. If you're just looking for a special gift, it's not that big of a deal. But overall, on the enthusiasts, it's, you try it once and then it's like, nope, I've had it. I don't want to give it another shot. And so, just to go through that same process of mirroring the Kentucky, what the Kentucky distillers do, there was a problem because there wasn't a lot of information out there. Today we have vast amount of information, but craft distilling, it's not like craft brewing. You can't just tinker at your house, come up with something that you like, and then plan on scaling that up once you open up your own brewery. At a craft distillery, you've got one option. You can do it illegally, or you can go work at a distillery that's already running. And, that's an option. But 20 years ago, you basically just had the big guys. So getting a job there where it was actually hands-on production was much tougher. Now that we have 18 to 2,000 craft distillers, you've got a bunch of places you could work. You also have a bunch of guys that you could ask, and ladies that you can ask questions. So that's even more important, because if you're having a problem with your fermentation and your mash, you've got people you can rely on. And, one of the big things about people talk about, the limestone water is why Kentucky has all the bourbon. And well, it also has all the bourbon because it was a tough process, and that knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. And unless you were in, one of these 3 or 4 families that was a part of bourbon making in Kentucky, it was pretty tough to break in. And not to say that they didn't help others out or anything like that, but look at any distillery in Kentucky and you'll probably find the name Beam, Willett, and a few others. So the information was very limited. And now with it being opened up, there's ADI, who has a great discussion board for distillers. You start to see things start to improve. And overall, it's these marginal increases in value, production, and really just the process, improving the process along the way. And so then we kind of get into some of I'll call them the craft distilling dirty words. The biggest one was sourcing. And if you don't know, so sourcing is, you're a distillery, you're a brand, but you buy barrels from somebody else. You bring them in, you bottle them under your own label. That's fine. And, on Sealbox, we carry a lot of source brands. The biggest thing that we talk about is transparency. And I think that also hurt the craft distilling industry, is because somebody thought that they were buying this craft spirit from, I won't say a particular state because you'll probably think I'm bashing one distillery over another, but say you're buying a craft spirit from Florida, since I'm in Jacksonville. And then all of a sudden you come to find out, you're like, oh man, this product's 8 years old, but this distillery's only been open for 6 months. How's that even possible? And, I think that hurt as well with just a lot of the value proposition, because if somebody's going to pay $100 for a bottle and feel good about it, they want to make sure it's something special. Then when they found out it came from a distillery in Indiana, they don't feel as special. They feel like they got duped, whatever it is. And even that we're seeing turning around some. So, I always say sourcing works. You look at people like High West, like Smooth Ambler, Blom Brothers out of Illinois. There's a lot of people who are sourcing and doing it the right way. I always liked Blom Brothers because they called their source bourbon Notter, like Knotter, like not our bourbon. They're upfront about it. Smooth Ambler had the Old Scout line because they said Old Scout is what we source, and we'll come out with our own products later down the line. And there's a good way of doing it, and being transparent, I think, is it's really important. I was talking with Chattanooga Whiskey, their master distiller Grant, about this. He's like, we learned so much about the bourbon making process from those years of sourcing. We were always trying to make our own bourbon, and we were waiting, but it kept us afloat. It got the brand out there, it built relationships. And then, just between blending, between using different finishing barrels, all this stuff is important. And one thing that I do like seeing in the American whiskey market today is some of these independent bottlers. And to, throw Kenny and Ryan a little shout out, the Pursuit series is bouncing around from distilleries across the country where they say, hey, you may not buy this bottle on your own because it's in whatever state and you don't know about it. But because of their following, they're opening up bourbon drinkers and whiskey drinkers to new distilleries. And I think that's a huge thing in the is just bringing it to more and more people. It's hard for a distillery to be everywhere, so independent bottlers and sourcers play an important role there. So next kind of dirty word in craft distilling is small barrels. We've all seen it. We've all had, and if you haven't, I'll send you a free sample of a product that it's just too young. It was in a small barrel, and so basically what happens is a whiskey goes into the barrel. The first thing it's going to start to pull out is some of the color from the char of the inside of the barrel. Then you're going to get all the oak. Then, you get some other things happening. I'm not going to get into the chemistry. I'm not equipped to do all of that. But overall, you get just more and more flavor notes coming out, more of the vanillin, different fruity notes you start to break down. And that's the maturation, the aging process. In a small barrel, you have more surface area. So you're going to automatically just pull out more oak. You taste it and it's like pine sol. And so, this is another problem, but it just because it is a problem doesn't mean it can't be done correctly. And that's what we're seeing a little more of. Small barrels are still tougher, but you have people like Driftless Glen. They have some 25, 30 gallon barrels that are great. Manifest Distilling in Jacksonville, they have some smaller barrels for their rye that are great. And even Kings County is still playing around with some 5 to 10 gallon barrels, and the stuff is really good. So I always look at it as garbage in, garbage out. If you didn't start with a great process for your production, and you have a bad product going into a barrel, the barrel is not magic. The barrel helps out a ton, but it's not magic. You're going to have a bad product on the outside, or once it comes out of the barrel. And we'll dive a little bit into that production, get to the nitty gritty of the production up next. The last dirty word is just expensive. And, it's tough to see, we'll say this time and time again, but it's tough to see Wild Turkey 101 on the shelf for $20 and then whatever bourbon on the shelf for $80. And, we'll call ABC craft bourbon is 2-3 years old, and Wild Turkey 6 to 8 years. I get it. But you have to think about the process. Distilleries are manufacturing plants for alcohol. They're buying just tons and tons of grain every day, distilling it and putting out 500 to 1,000 barrels at a day at times, some of these major distilleries. There's economies of scale there that the craft guys just don't have. But that's an important part. There's some that make it work. the other important part is just the ingredients that they're using are higher quality. So I'll give you an example of Old 55. That's a distillery in Indiana. So average bushel of corn, if they were just buying it on the open market, is about $4. It's 56 pounds of corn. Sweet corn, which is what Old 55 uses in their sweet corn bourbon, it's 100% sweet corn, is $1,040 for a 50-pound bag of sweet corn. That's a huge difference. And that's not even to talk about the opportunity cost. So a lot of these grains can be even more difficult to distill, manufacture, and all that. So, Old 55, Jason Fruits over there was telling me that he can distill about 19 barrels over a 7-week process of the sweet corn, just because it's a very, very finicky grain. It's hard to work with. It takes longer to ferment. It takes longer to distill. He can get about 19 barrels. If he just did his normal run of bourbon, he'd do 200 barrels. So we're talking of 10x the amount of barrels that he can do with some of these different grains. But that's the exciting part, is you get into the heritage grains, and they do add important flavor notes to it. And that kind of leads me to one of these last points of what got better. The whole point is, I've been setting this up for what got better. Well, the biggest improvement just come from the process, and it's time. People got better at distilling. People got better at fermenting. People got better at barrel selection, and the flavors really come out. And if you start to look at it, you think about it, ingredients of baking a cake. So we'll take an old fashioned. If you just use your regular cheap white sugar, make a simple syrup, and then you grab some, cheap whiskey off the bottom shelf that's been blended. It's a blended whiskey, so it's half essentially vodka, half whiskey. Your old fashioned is going to taste a lot different. If you use a good aged spirit, a good aged bourbon in an old fashioned, you use something like Demerara sugar, or even a brown sugar, or like a maple syrup, and then you use high quality bitters, you're going to have a much better old fashioned. And that's where the grains play the biggest role. For the longest time, Kentucky basically just says, yep, 80% corn, get your sugar that you need, throw in 15% for rye for flavor, and you get 5% of malted barley, so that the mash will convert into alcohol. The craft distillers, and what's the exciting thing is, they bring that back, and they say, hold on, so the corn's the biggest part. Why are we just using number 2 dent corn? Not that it hasn't made a better product or a good product, but could we use something better? So they're pulling things like heritage grains in. You have High Wire that uses Jimmy Red corn, and you look at it, and you taste it just in the raw ingredient, and Jimmy Red corn tastes way different than just a standard corn you'd see in a grocery store. They also use a lot of different malts. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of malts. You have pale malts, you have caramel malts, you have chocolate malts, you have rye malts, you have wheat malt, all this different stuff. Those bring in different flavor complexities. They bring in different profiles, and that then so you select better grains. And after that, you go to fermentation. So the fermentation is, you cook all the grains, you add yeast, converts into CO2 and alcohol. That's a tricky process. It's all about temperature control. It's all about length of time. And a lot of these craft distillers, they're using a much longer fermentation process. So while all the sugar has been converted to alcohol, there's still a lot of esterification going on, a lot of different flavor notes that are coming out because of the longer fermentation. Once all that's dialed in, you get into the still. So you have 2 types of stills. You have a column still, which is a continuous large still. It makes a much more it's a much more consistent product. Then you have a small pot still. That's just a batch still. You throw your mash in, you distill it, you're done. And so on a batch still, they talk about making cuts. So you've got your you've got your heads, your hearts, and your tails. In the heads, stuff you don't want, bad kinds of alcohol. Then you get into the hearts, that's the stuff you do want, which is all the good alcohol. Then you get into your tails, and there's different things. If it starts smelling like A wet dog is how I've heard it referred to in the tails. That's how you know you're in your tails. But if you make a tighter cut in the middle, you're going to have more good product going into the barrel. That's just another way I've seen a lot of distillers make improvement. And then you get into barrel selection, which we touched on a little bit earlier, but barrels make a huge deal. Number 3 char barrel from ISC is going to have a much different flavor profile than a number 4 char that's been toasted from Kelvin. There's different wood, has it been have the staves been air dried, or were they kiln dried? Were they air dried for 36 months or 12 months? All these things play a role. And so what has happened in craft distilling is a lot of these guys have broken down all of these things, and they've said these are all ingredients. We've got 1,000 different inputs from different types of grains, different types of fermentation, different distillation methods, different barrels, different ages of time in the barrel, different places in the warehouse in the barrel. So it starts to sound really confusing. And that's why I think it's taken, so long for a lot of this to start being a really good product. But you throw all those ingredients, all those inputs into it, and you start to find something that works. And that allows, with all the different inputs, allows craft distillers to have their own, unique fingerprint on their whiskey. And that's really what I think is the most exciting thing. You taste something from Chattanooga whiskey, you're going to know it's Chattanooga whiskey. It comes forward as just this great caramel, rounded. There's maltiness because they use a high malt. And then you try something from like Finger Lakes Distilling up in New York. Something that aged in Tennessee compared to something that aged in New York it's gonna have a much different flavor profile. And so all of that is what I love about craft whiskey, and why it has gotten better is there's just been more time, there's more information, there's more trial and error, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're onto something here. And that's just a great part of where I think this is going. I think, but once you start to take a step back and realize how much more expensive, the extra $10, $20 a bottle doesn't seem nearly as much when you consider what they have to do to make that. So, all in all, if you haven't given craft whiskey a try, I do have Sealbox. I have some of my favorites up there. That's the selfish plug I'm going to throw out there. And we are offering free shipping for this weekend with the promo code YFH. So whiskey from home, but just YFH is the promo code, and we'll offer free shipping on that. If you need a place to start, check out somebody like a New Riff, because New Riff is, they brought in the former master distiller from MGP to consult with them, Larry Ebersold, and I think he got them to a product that tastes like true Kentucky bourbon, and it's high rye, but it still has its own spin to it. And they're a great one. Chattanooga, which we talked about, is a great one. Spirits of French Lick, Copper Sea out of New York, and there's just so many to try. I'd love to sit here and just sit here and drink and run you through a tasting, but hopefully with all this information. Or no, sorry, I said that wrong. I said the promo code wrong. Yeah, it's WFH. Yeah. So it is WFH. Maybe I'll throw in the wrong one I said, but no, definitely check it out. It's free shipping is with WFH, whiskey from home. I start talking a little too fast and get a little too excited talking about craft whiskey. But yeah, no, check it out. I'm happy to answer any questions that other people have. I know 30 minutes it can be quick to try to run through what has happened over the last decade in the craft distilling industry, but overall we're at a good place, and it only leads up to even better stuff in the future. I look at something, we did a survey with ADI, and we basically surveyed, I think it was 50 different distillers, about how many barrels they're producing in 2019, how many barrels they plan to produce in 2020, and what are the oldest ages. And you have everywhere from 46,000 barrels a year, 10,000, 3,000, 2,000, 5,000, with a lot of whiskey in the 4 to 6 year range. and we've seen that just with more bottled and bond releases on the market. There's a lot more bottled and bond craft whiskey out there today than there has ever been in the past 5-6 years. And that just, not to say that age is everything, but it does help in general. So that looks like that'll about be at my time. But once again, sorry for messing up the promo code. It is WFH for free shipping at CO Box. And Kenny, Ryan, Fred, thank you guys for having me. And
we still got a few questions for you. For you. So, you ended up, you were like us, right? I mean, when you start getting into whiskey, you ended up really focusing on the big ones on the shelves. You know, as we had mentioned, the Four Roses and the Wild Turkeys. What for you made you want to start looking into more craft whiskey?
Yeah, so there were a couple. So Wyoming was one where it was like, oh wow, this is really good. And I have a Wyoming whiskey review on Bourboner that I talk about that. Now Wyoming did the bigger scale. They did a continuous still, and then, so that was a big one. Tasted some of the Smooth Ambler stuff, and that was really good. And then just, Town Branch had some things I liked. A few guys locally, St. Augustine Distillery, they opened up. Manifest Distillery, they opened up. And then you just start to see like, oh, there's all kinds of stuff out there where people are focusing on the grains. And what I always tell people is like, I don't want a craft distillery to be Four Roses, because if I want to drink Four Roses, I'm going to go buy Four Roses. I want them to give me something different. I want it to be good, but I want it to be different. And you started to see that. You started to see, what changes. And we all chase different bourbons. We all try different bourbons. And how much can we drink of the same thing? So I think a lot of people are at a point where it's like, yeah, I want to try something different. Maybe adding a lot more malt to the mash bill does make a good product. So let's give that a try. So,
and last question, this one's coming from Whiskey Behaviors. What's the youngest whiskey that you've had that you would put the Seal Box name on?
Ooh. So I don't know if this one's just top of mind because I'm thinking about it. So Rua, which is Great Wagon Road Distilling out of Charlotte. It's American single malt, and we were tasting some private barrel picks or private barrel samples yesterday. They had a 14-month sample, and I kind of was like, geez, I guess those guys really don't like me, sending me the 14-month stuff. And then we tried it, and I'm like, is this the winner? And so it actually came down between that and another sample for the winner. But so yeah, I mean, 14 months was something I drank, and you would probably pick up a little bit of the youth on the finish just because it wasn't as rounded and that kind of stuff, but it was tasty.
Well, awesome. Cheers, Blake. And thanks for kind of giving everybody an insight into really like craft whiskey and everything like that. So make sure you go check out Blake's blog at bourboner.com. If you are even in the Facebook world, go check out the Bourboner Facebook group. There's 30,000 people in it now. What are you up to?
Yeah, I think so. Some little 33, 34.
All right. So 30,000 people talking about bourbon every single day. So go ahead, join that. And then make sure you go check out sealbox.com. And I will make sure that everybody gets the free shipping code and Eventbrite email after this. So cheers, Blake.
Perfect. Thanks, Kenny. Have a good one.
Take care.